All right, welcome to the second virtual edition of the Seattle Mariners RBI Club. I am Charlie Furbush, former Mariner. Some of you may know me, some of you may recognize me a little bit, maybe not so much without the beard, but today we are here with Brad Balukjian and having a great conversation about his book, The Wax Pack. I also want to let everyone know in the RBI Club that there will be a board meeting on May 22nd, and after that we will give an entire membership an update on the plan for the coming months for the RBI Club. Brad Balukjian, glad to have you here. You did a great job, and we're going over your beautiful Wax Pack book, which I had a very, very pleasure in reading. So I just want to introduce you, Brad, and how you doing today?
Thanks, Charlie. I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Haven't really, I gotta admit, I haven't read a book in quite some time. Maybe more into the audiobooks these days, but
Right.
I had a really good time reading it, and I was actually born in 1986, so I kind of had this weird connection. And while you were writing the book in 2015, my career unfortunately ended, and I had a rotator cuff injury, which I threw my last pitch in 2015. So it's kind of a cool little connection of how this full circle moment came to me, and I was able to enjoy your book and enjoy the journey you went on through the entire United States. So
Did the thought cross your mind of like, what would it be like if somebody did a wax pack from 2015 and you were in it, and what would that be like? Yeah,
absolutely. It made me think, like, if there's a kid out there still collecting cards, and I maybe have signed one back in the day, and I'm just like, wow, this is maybe 20 years from now, that'd be an epic book,
right.
part two.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me get into a couple questions, Brad.
Sure.
It's some really interesting questions here, and first one is from Robert Simone, and he wants to know, how did your dad like this book?
That's a great question, which I have not been asked that often, surprisingly. So my dad loves the book. I just talked to him. He's actually on the road now, driving back to Rhode Island. He lives in Chicago. And I feel like my dad's like my best PR guy. He's just always, I was at spring training with him right before the COVID hit. And we went to a bunch of games and did the baseball thing. And he was, we were walking around and he was handing out like business cards for my book and like just going up to everybody he could, just, hey, check this book out. My son wrote this book. So it's kind of cool to see how enthusiastic he gets about it. But, so my dad is also in the book, and he's particularly in the chapter about Lee Mazzilli. Fathers and sons, plays a huge role, a theme in the book, which is something I didn't really know going in. I didn't expect that to be such a big theme, but as I went, as you'll see in the book, so many of these guys actually had really broken relationships with their fathers. And that was a theme that surprised me, that kept coming up, was how many guys had a really tough time with their dads. And so my dad joined me on the road when I met up with Mazzilli, who actually is on the other side, had a really good relationship with his son and his dad. And so, but part of the storyline in the book is me talking very openly about, although I'm close with my dad, kind of some of the barriers in our relationship. And then we have the moment where I, kind of get stuff off my chest that I wanted him to hear. And my description of my dad is very honest. And so when you write about somebody that openly and honestly, you're always curious, like how they're going to react. So I was wondering what my dad was going to think. But as I talked about in the book, my dad is like a lot of men, and a lot of men from that generation, and in their 60s and 70s, is not a guy that likes to talk about his feelings. And so,
Right.
Not surprisingly, when I asked him how he liked the book, he would rave on about how much he loved it, but he never really asked me or confronted me about some of the really personal, open stuff that I reveal about my relationship with him, which was so perfect in that even having gone through all that with my dad, he's still my dad. Like, he's still not one to take the initiative and volunteer to talk about the thing that makes him uncomfortable. Right. And so, I thought that was interesting. I mean, it was, people have asked me, oh, has your relationship with your dad changed a lot as a result of the book? And the answer is not really. I mean, he's still my dad. He's still going to want to talk about the weather and sports versus his feelings. But at least we had that moment of open communication, and he we kind of understand each other and we've accepted each other for our differences.
That's cool. Yeah, I know how, through the book, you saw so many vast differences between the player and their father. And, initially it may seem like the father is an inspiration, and then it can kind of get crazy as life goes on. So, yeah, it's kind of fun to see how your relationship evolved with your father throughout this book.
Was that something that, like, when you found being on a major league clubhouse in the mid 2010s, did you feel like guys were pretty open about talking about your teammates, open about talking about their feelings, or did it seem kind of more closed off?
That's a really good question. I would say it's kind of a mixed bag there, because you get a group of teammates that sometimes are different from year to year. So me being who I am, I'm pretty much an open book. What you see is what you get. I'm willing to share pretty much any piece of information, any sort of vulnerability, because I truly believe that being vulnerable is how you gain trust and earn new friends. Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of the theme of my book, is vulnerability. And I asked you that because I feel like, I wonder if it's changed, because in the era that I wrote about in the 70s and 80s, I think guys were still more closed off. And I wonder if people are opening up more now.
I would say partially. I think people are realizing the value in being vulnerable and learning from your mistakes and owning them and feeling that you are making progress. But I think in terms of the day-to-day clubhouse camaraderie type stuff, that's the type of thing that you really open up and you learn so much about somebody's personal life. So it's really, you'd like to think that it's evolving, but everyone's different. And that's kind of the magical potion that people are trying to figure out, is how to get the right mix of 25 guys and bring them to the World Series. So it's a constant evolution there. But yeah, let me ask you another one from Robert Simone here. How did you end up getting your book published by Nebraska?
Yeah, it was a long process. So I took the trip in 2015. The book obviously didn't come out until now in 2020. And the reason why is it went through a lot of rejection. And it's my first book. I realized, how hard it is to get a book published. And it was really, it was frustrating and demoralizing at times, because I never stopped believing that this was a really good book. Like, I think I know my writing and myself well enough to say, like, no, that's not good. Like, I can recognize that. And I just always felt like the idea was good and the execution was good, and I believed in it. And so when I was going, I had an agent, and we went to the big publishers in New York, and there's basically 5 companies that control all publishing. And I actually counted last night. I got rejected 38 times for many different reasons, including, like, well, it was also frustrating because most people said, like, this is really great and you're a great writer, but you don't have 100,000 Twitter followers, or you don't have a platform. No one knows who you are, right?
Come on.
And so that's what they're thinking purely in the economics and the marketing part. And, you go into the bookstore, well, when you could do that, and you look at the nonfiction shelf, and most of the books are by celebrities, right? So they're thinking, well, no one's going to buy a book about Brad Balukjian, because, so that was their rationale. And I just wanted someone to take a chance on me, and, knowing that it was a risk, because I'm a new author. And thankfully, finally, University of Nebraska, who has a great tradition of publishing baseball books, I contacted their editor, and I pitched it, and he was like, this is great. This is fantastic. Let's do this. And so finally, after going 0 for 38, the difference between publishing and baseball is, if you go 1 for 39 in publishing, you're set, because you only need that one. If you go 1 for 39 in baseball, you're probably heading back to AAA, right? So
yeah, exactly. That's you don't want to be in that type of slump. So yeah, that's great. That's great that you got out of that. Now, do you have another one? Do you have a vision of when your book tour may be? I know the world is crazy and everything's up in the air right now, but do you have a vision of maybe when and how that may look?
Yeah, I mean, I really, I obviously love being on the road, based on driving 11,341 miles from my book. So I had this trip planned from Rhode Island to Oklahoma City and back. And I was actually going to make appearances with a bunch of the guys from the book. So Lee Mazzilli and Gary Templeton and Rance Mullenix were all kind enough to be willing to make appearances with me. That was supposed to happen now. That got canceled. So we still don't know when baseball is going to be back, right? But I'm thinking more and more like it might have to wait till next year, because even if bookstores do reopen, it's not going to be the way it was. You're going to have, limiting how many people can be in the store. So until like this whole thing really gets done, which may not be, until next year, I think I'm looking for maybe next summer as a chance to reschedule.
Cool. Yeah, I know a few people are going to be interested in seeing that. I thought visually you were able to put those cards in the book that really painted the picture of what it looked like and what cards were like in 1986. I mean,
Yeah.
A lot different than you'd get in 2020 here. So it was pretty cool. So Diana Gens wants to know, when is the movie coming out?
Sorry. It's when I would tell people about this book over it's been 6 years, and no matter what part of the process, I would just describe what it was about, and they'd be like, "Oh, that should be a movie." That was always their response. And I get why. It's like a road trip. It's got that kind of Almost Famous meets Field of Dreams kind of feel. It's funny that the short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is just this morning, I did get an email from a writer in Hollywood who's done some stuff with some pretty big name actors who's interested in the rights. So it may happen. Of course, what everyone's told me is once you give control of a book to Hollywood, like don't expect to have any say in what they do with it. You definitely see some creative things happen to stories when they go to movies.
Oh, I'm sure. All right. Well, we're on to Alan Childick, and he wants to know, when you started out writing this book, were you hoping to tell the individual players' stories, or were you hoping to use the players as a narrative to tell your own story about society or baseball or even your own journey?
Yeah. Well, so clearly I ended up doing the latter, but in the beginning of the idea starting with just like taking a pack and writing a book based on it, I did think initially about something like writing the story of the 86 season through the different perspectives of the 14 guys. I think the idea of like writing about each individual player, if it was just a kind of a story about them, it would be like taking 14 magazine profiles and stapling them together, which to me wasn't the point of the book. Like I wanted the book to have that narrative flow and that through line. And to me, the only way to make that happen was for me to be in the book, as the bridge between all the players, which was, a really cool thing for me to do because, these are the guys that I collected as a kid. And it was almost like being the messenger for your childhood heroes. Like literally I'm talking to Steve Yeager and he's flipping through the cards in the pack. And he gets to Richie Hebner. He's like, "Tell Richie, we got to go chase some nurses," And so then 3,000 miles later, Richie Hebner's flipping through the pack and he gets to Steve Yeager, and I can finally deliver that message. And, Richie Hebner kind of gives a little smile and a chuckle. And so it was kind of this cool, like, because most of these guys are not actively talking to each other now, but they clearly have good memories of each other and wanted me to pass messages back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can only imagine you almost felt like you went back in time and they were reliving some of their glory days through you. So it was really cool to learn about that and to see how the love for baseball is pretty common throughout everyone that plays the game. So it was fun to see. I really personally enjoyed your experience on the 4th of July over at Jaime Kokenauer's place. That was a great part of the book that you got to. I mean, how many times are you going to be able to experience something like that? So I think doing something like what you did and driving as far as you did, I think, for me, if you had approached me with this idea, I would have been something pretty similar in that regard, just wanting to be an open book and share a story with you. And I think having your background and your ability to bring out the best and ask some really good questions that allow people to kind of evaluate where they came from and understand that it's really cool and really, really special. And for you to look up to guys like that when you were young, for instance, I was a fan growing up in New England of this guy, Ellis Burks. I'm sure you were familiar.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So he was an idol of mine growing up, and I was a Red Sox fan. So to kind of get a glimpse of maybe what life was like when he was playing, it was really cool. But
have you ever met him?
I have never met him. No, it was, I was always a fan of everything he could do. So it was fun, but I was hoping at one point, maybe I was like, maybe there'll be an Ellis Burks card coming in here. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But all right. Ellen Durenberger has a few things to say. She really enjoyed the book, and the stories
Thank
about
you.
the players and your life and your trip story growing up and meeting your dad on the trip. That was really cool. I think she really wants to know is, I think as all of us do, is someone that drinks coffee as much as we do here in Seattle, is how many cups have you had today?
Yeah. And the sad thing is that I didn't go to Seattle on the road trip. But no, well, let's see. I mean, I've had only two, so that's, not too much abuse there, but coffee definitely got me through the trip. That was my emotional crutch.
Oh, I imagine. I'm kind of curious as to how you were able to keep track. Do you have like a coffee app, or are you just
No,
tallying it down in your book every day?
Old fashioned. I had this old like grid ledger thing, and I would mark down how many miles I drove every day, and then how many cups of coffee that I had as I went. Just thinking that it would be I was doing a daily blog, and I would update my blog every day with how many cups. So thank you, Ellen, for enjoying the book.
Yeah. I guess since I am a former MLB player, have you sent your book to any other MLB players she wants to know? Is there any feedback you've gotten from some current players in the league right now?
Yeah. So I sent it. So Don Carmen, did you ever run across Don Carmen in your days?
I did not,
Okay.
unfortunately.
So he's a psychologist, for Scott Boris's company, and he was in the book, and he's my favorite player. So he's, kind of a star of the book. And he and I have sort of maintained a friendship after the book. And so I asked him when I was getting it done, I said, are there any players you work with that you think might really like this? And he said, send it to Matt Boyd. So Matt Boyd read it and actually wrote a nice little blurb about it. And I got to meet him back in September. Great guy, very thoughtful. He really seemed to appreciate it. So I know that Boyd has read it. I know that Carmen has said that this was really flattering to me, especially because he was my childhood hero, that he said that he's now going to have all of his clients read it. And so, and Carmen is, working for Boris, he's getting all these, top draft picks, and a lot of guys start working with him right after they sign. So they're still, right out of college or high school. And they may not even be in the majors yet, but knowing that like he thinks highly enough that he thinks this is an important thing for them to read, because I think the perspective that it gives a player is, it's like looking into a crystal ball a little bit. Like, this is your future. Like, when this whole bullet train ride is over, this is what comes next, right? So as much as you want to enjoy the ride, and it's, be aware that it is temporary, it's fleeting, and most of your life is not going to be doing this. So kind of keep that perspective in mind while you're focused on being the best ball player you can be. I think that's the value that he sees in young guys reading it.
I agree. As a former player, I can see the value in that big time. You get to see kind of how sometimes each person's career plays out, and everyone's different. I like to think that I've simplified it in the fact that, more often than not, an athlete's career comes to an end either with an injury or you're not good enough. And,
right.
It's kind of one of those two ways you just have to accept. And, the lucky ones get to go in the Hall of Fame and go out how they want to. But, it's an interesting thing how athletes go through the journey of, your dream coming true, like you said, and then boom, it's over. I mean, I basically went through this last few years and trying to figure out what the next step is. What, where do I fall in place here?
There's a great line from Randy Reddy in the book where he as soon as he's finished playing, and he had a good long career, he said his phone was ringing off the hook to go coach, because he was clearly a guy that was going to be a good coach. And he said that, he had to resist that temptation and take a few years to get the player out of him, because there's that process, there's that transition that you have to like mourn the death of the player before you can go on to the next phase. And I think all guys experience that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, how you get through that, some guys can basically get through it in a few months. For some guys, it takes a few years, and trying to figure out your new identity, if you will, and knowing that you're not just a baseball player, and you have a lot more to offer. So I think, we have a lot of unique experiences, and how we apply those when baseball's over is going to be the everlasting question.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ellen also wants to tell you that she's glad for the update on Jeannie.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Ellen, you can also know that Jeannie is my friend on Facebook. And someone somewhere said like that Jeannie was like their favorite part of the whole book. And I put that on Facebook, and Jeannie liked it. So I know Jeannie's happy and following it. Nice.
She wants to know, what are you currently writing right now? Anything in the mix that you're hoping to get out here soon?
Yeah, and so I'm just to mix sports for a second to go to football. I feel like I just spent 6 years throwing Hail Marys, and I need to go into like a West Coast offense now and throw some 5-yard slants. So
right.
I mean, my past, I had been a magazine writer and a newspaper writer, and I didn't know it was going to take 6 years to write a book. That's an enormous amount of time, and I'm really just trying to enjoy the moment now and enjoy talking to readers and promoting it. And I'm sure I have other book ideas, a lot of them more in science because I'm a biology professor. So there are things I want to do down the line, but I think in the short term, I'll probably try to do some shorter stuff to you got to build up a reserve tank to go into a book,
Oh, I'm sure it takes a lot of that. I know you said no, but a volume 2 of the Wax Pack, could you reconsider? Everyone wants to know. I think there's why don't you just go to 1987, pick 14 guys.
No, right? No, I get asked this all the time, and I feel bad because I'm truly flattered that people are so excited about a sequel. It's more like from a creative perspective, I think the novelty is gone once you do that. Once you do it the first time, it's like, I just think about how many sequels don't live up to the original. And unless you're going to hit like that Star Wars or Godfather gold. Also because it's like the book, as we've said, is a lot about me. And I've already told my story. So, not much has changed in a few years. So I think the device is great. I think other people could take it and do many different types of books or sports or years. I'll always be attracted to the bigger human themes that the book evokes. And so that's what I'm interested in tapping into, is themes that go above the content, that we can all relate to. Because the book really isn't about baseball. It's about these bigger themes.
Absolutely. Yeah, she also wants to say she enjoyed the opening and ending chapters about the Topps factory and workers. I mean, which I also found, very, very interesting. But you actually chewed the gum, which is astonishing that it's even still in one piece, if it was.
Well, not for long. Yeah, it was short-lived. Yeah.
It brought back memories for her because she chewed the gum too.
Oh, cool. All right.
Alan Sherwood here. He wants to know, what is your favorite Mariners logo and uniform, and why?
Okay, so I've actually been thinking about this, and the Mariners will appreciate. Like, I think we all need to just stop everything and agree to nationwide become Seattle Mariners fans, because they are the last team that has not made the World Series, right?
Yeah, we're in a little bit of a drought, let's say. We're maybe on that 0 for 38 streak we were on. My
book is celebrating underdogs. It's what it's all about. Everything about the book is underdogs. The Seattle Mariners, even though I'm an A's fan, with apologies, the Mariners are the ultimate underdog left in baseball. And so, but to answer the question, I love the Trident from 1981, that era. I love those late 70s, early 80s Mariners uniforms and logos are so great. And actually, I've always liked the Mariners. I've always, again, I want to see them, get there, because they are the best underdog left.
Right. Absolutely. I think we're in line for a championship here soon, so it should be pretty good. So I have a question from my perspective is, throughout this journey of basically kind of traveling around like a baseball player, if you will, did you find that you had a new appreciation for baseball players, maybe what they went through and how it all worked out?
Except I bet you stayed in nicer hotels than I did, Charlie.
Well, that was, once you get to the big leagues, that's for sure,
Although, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about like the different, and I'm sure you can speak to this, but the difference between the minor league experience and the major league experience, like that's an enormous gap, right?
Big time. Yeah. I mean, it's, the game's the same. It's just sometimes where you're playing and who's watching is not. So,
not to, I mean, like, the looking at the salaries and how hard it is to make a living when you're in single A, double A. I mean, that's rough.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a common theme about how you felt about your book. You knew it was good. You knew you were all in. You were committed to seeing this thing through. And every baseball player that's playing is doing the same thing. And they don't care if they go 0 for 100. It's keep going. A lot of guys are going to do everything they can to get to the top. So in that regard, you've kind of done the same thing. Just keep pushing something. You found something great. And I'm glad to be a part of this here. We get another question here from.
Oh no, but I didn't answer your question. I mean, so to answer, I don't want to be a hypocrite as a journalist myself. I always want to make sure I answer a question when I get asked. So it's weird. So I'm now 39. Like when I look at my old cards, I physically feel I can get back into that headspace of being like an 8 or 10-year-old. And I remember thinking those guys just seem so adult and grown up, right? Now I'm 39, I'm talking to you, you're retired and you're 5 years younger than me, let alone the guys that are playing now who are in their early 20s. And I realized like how old I am and how, but what I learned from taking the trip was to see baseball players, former, current players, more kind of like, as peers in a way. I mean, not to say I could ever play baseball, but we tend to idolize Major League Baseball players, which is great when you're a kid. But as an adult, I don't think it's healthy to over idolize Major League Baseball players. You're just a guy just like me. And what I realized in the book is that the stuff that you deal with is the same stuff that I deal with. Like the issues that you struggle with are what I struggle with. And so I actually felt closer to these guys more as like a peer. Like it kind of demystified some of that hero stuff in a healthy way. And it also, I think, makes fans and made me as a fan more compassionate to current players in that, and you can tell me if this is true, but you go to a game and there's 30,000 people there, and players, when they're on the field in uniform, they act like they don't hear anything. There's a guy heckling, they're booing, they're screaming, they're calling your name. You act like you're deaf, but you do hear those things. when they're on you, it does hurt your feelings. You're human, And I think fans sometimes forget that, like, because they paid their hard-earned money, that they can do whatever they want. And it's like, no, these are guys, these are humans just like you with feelings. And it's like, you want to boo a whole team, that's fine. But like booing guys for making an error, it's like, I'm not comfortable with that, because you can see, I've seen the human side of these guys and I appreciate that. And so that vulnerability has made me, I think, feel closer to them in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, a great point that you make there. I had a fun time just thinking back on my career and, the experiences I had, and trying to just be in the moment and live for right now. It's, you talk about that in the books about not trying to, focus on the past or the mistakes, and don't look too far ahead. And I found that it kind of reinvigorated how I think. Just, you can only control what you can. Do what you can in the moment and live now, and whatever happens is kind of out of your hands.
I say there that baseball players are accidental Buddhists because they're really good at being in the present moment,
So I have a question just in terms of you being an author and having quite an experience in your life. Do you actually have an appreciation or a preference, shall I say, for physical books, ebooks or audiobooks? Is there something?
I'm definitely a hard copy fan. I guess I'm become a crotchety old guy in that way, that I just think there's something about the tactile physical object that I love having in my hand. So I'm not a big fan of ebooks. I love the hard copy. I actually like audiobooks. I didn't think I would like. I remember the first time I tried it, I was like going to be driving and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to follow along. And I thought it was great. And I actually did the audiobook for my own book. I taped it down in LA last month, and that was quite an experience. I have a new appreciation for voice actors, because you're in this little tiny studio for like 6 hours a day, and you don't know till you try to do that how hard it is to read out loud in a way that you don't go too fast and you enunciate. And every time, like when I was taping it, if I shifted in my seat, the microphones are so sensitive that they would pick that up and I'd have to redo it. So
No, wow.
it was a fun experience, but it was not easy.
Nice. So was there anyone, when you got the Wax Pack, the original Wax Pack, was there anyone you were, I guess, hoping you would get in there that you didn't get?
Well, so Don Carmen was number one, and he was there. So I think number two would have been Ellis Burke's teammate, Marty Barrett. I don't know.
All right.
He was probably like gone by the time you were a Red Sox fan, but he was from those late '80s Red Sox teams.
Nice.
And I always liked the guys that were not the stars. Those were my favorite players. So
yeah, I fully believe it. I kind of associate myself with the underdog, the outlier, if you will.
I'm sure you probably still get cards in the mail to sign, right?
Oh yeah, from time to time. It's kind of funny how they find your address, but I've definitely saved a couple. It's like you talked about in the book, when you first experienced seeing those people outside with all the books of cards trying to get autographs. That's pretty regular everywhere you go. So. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting to see how the card industry has changed over the years, because back in the 80s and early 90s when we were young, it was huge. And I remember having the Beckett Sports Book to see how much the cards were worth, and you could, trade them with your friends and everything. So it was a really cool thing. And I'm hoping that cards kind of come back to life. I think it's a cool commodity that we all experienced, and hopefully kids these days are going to continue collecting and getting autographs. And
it's the best entry to the game for kids.
I agree. And you get to get a little synopsis on the back of the card about everything you think you know about them. So it's pretty cool. I think we all here are really thankful that you took time to talk with us. This has been a fantastic little get together, Brad. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. But is there anything you want to add, or anything you want to talk about?
I got one question for you, Charlie.
All right.
In all honesty, what was your reaction when you read about the guys that didn't talk to me, like Fisk and Gooden and Coleman? Yeah,
that was very interesting. Kind of felt like a game of cat and mouse there for a little while for you. I would say, it kind of goes to what you asked earlier about what are the guys like? Are they opening up, or people kind of being more vulnerable, getting to know each other? And I think there is this sense of, when you come up as a baseball player, you are taught to give cliche answers, if you will. And
right.
Standard, try to, not about me, it's always about the team.
Yeah.
And I was really sympathetic for what you were going through, because I felt like for me, I would have been a little bit more open up. But some guys, I think that just goes to who they are and what they're about, and their personality of being private and secluded and not wanting everyone to know this, that, and everything about them. I think we know nowadays how, some guys probably wouldn't have survived back in the day with Twitter and all the social media devices out here. There's a lot of different times than it is.
Would have had a lot less fun. I know that much.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say, I was more sympathetic for what you were going through, not being able to talk to some of those guys. And, obviously the unfortunate part with Doc Gooden there, that was, kind of out of your hands anyways. But, it'd be nice to, have these guys, hopefully maybe you could send them a copy of the book and they can just read it and learn a little bit about themselves and, maybe what they're like. But yeah, I thought you did a great job. You really got a I really appreciate you talking about the underdogs, because I consider myself one of those. And really, when you look at sports in general, a lot of the guys are underdogs. A lot of the guys are unknowns. Only a few guys are top popular players, if you will. So
right, and you may be an underdog in the context of Major League Baseball, but in the bigger context of baseball, anyone who makes the major leagues is a superstar. I mean, you have to to get there.
Oh, for sure. I guess being from Maine, I guess I always consider myself an underdog. Way up in the Northeast.
Right. Well, thanks for having me, Charlie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, before we go, the RBI Club would like to thank you for your time, Brad. That was amazing. And we will have another board meeting on May 22nd. And after that event, we will give the entire membership update on our plan for the next coming months. So thanks again, Brad, and appreciate you joining us.
All right, thank you.